Colonel Nathan Walker pressed his boot against Madison Reed's radio and crushed it into the dirt. She was still screaming his name through the smoke when he turned his back, grabbed the classified case, and walked away. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. He ordered the airstrike while she was still breathing. If you believe loyalty means something, subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The mission briefing had been clean, precise, and completely wrong. Captain Madison Reed sat in the back of the transport vehicle and studied the satellite images one more time, not because she doubted her preparation, but because she had learned years ago that the moment you stopped questioning what you thought you already knew was the moment the enemy stopped being afraid of you. She had 12 soldiers under her direct command that night. She had memorized every face, every specialty, every name of every wife and child waiting at home. That was her version of military leadership, not the medals pinned to a chest at a ceremony, but the quiet, brutal weight of knowing that every decision she made in the dark had consequences that would live in daylight forever. Reed. The voice came from the seat beside her, low and controlled, the kind of voice that had learned to flatten itself into something unreadable over years of command. She turned. Colonel Nathan Walker was watching her with that expression she had come to know better than almost anyone else on earth, the one that looked like confidence but carried something underneath it she had never been able to name. "We go in clean," he said, "in and out. The target doesn't know we're coming." "The target never knows," she said, "right up until they do." Nathan's mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's why I want you on point. You read rooms faster than anyone I've ever worked with." Madison held his gaze for a second longer than was strictly necessary. There was something in his voice tonight that felt off, too smooth, too deliberate, like a man reciting lines he had rehearsed instead of speaking from instinct. She filed it away without reacting to it. 12 years in special operations had taught her that the body registers danger before the mind catches up. You learn to trust the feeling without letting it slow your hands. "I'll get us in," she said. "You make sure we get out." "Always," he said. That word would come back to her later in the dark when she was bleeding into the dirt and calling his name into a radio that no longer reached anyone who cared. The facility looked exactly like the intelligence said it would, an abandoned processing plant carved into the rock face of the eastern mountain range. No visible guards on the perimeter, 3 confirmed entry points. What the intelligence did not say, because the people who wrote it apparently did not know or did not care, was that the inside of that building was not abandoned at all. Someone had been in there very recently. The fire suppression systems had been manually bypassed. The internal communications lines had been rerouted. And the loading dock on the eastern end, which the satellite images showed as empty, was not empty anymore. Madison figured all of that out approximately 4 seconds after she stepped through the primary entry point and heard the sound of boots moving in formation above her. "We got people inside," she said into her radio voice, flat and fast. "This isn't clean. Walker, we need to reassess right now." "Continue the mission," Nathan said. She stopped moving. "Say again." "Continue the mission, Reed. Intel says the target is in the lower level. We push through." Every instinct she had went rigid. "Walker, there are at least 8 to 12 people on the upper floor. This building has been reactivated. We were not briefed on any of this." "I know," he said. 2 words, delivered in a tone so controlled it bordered on clinical. And in that moment, Madison felt something shift inside the operation that she could not immediately explain. Not fear, not confusion, but a very specific kind of cold clarity, the kind that arrives when you realize the danger is not where you were told it was. She made a decision. She kept moving, not because she trusted Nathan's assessment, but because her soldiers were already inside, already committed, and pulling back in a building with a compromised upper level was more dangerous than pressing forward. She moved through the corridor with Corporal James Holt on her left and Specialist Danny Ortega on her right, both of them reading her body language and tightening their own movement accordingly. They had worked together long enough that communication between them required almost no words. A hand signal, a shift in pace, a tilt of the head, they understood each other the way musicians understand tempo without looking at the conductor. They made it to the lower corridor. The target was not there. What was there was a receiving room fully cleared of personnel with a single crate resting in the center of the floor, surrounded by industrial lighting that someone had set up in the last hour. The crate was military grade, the kind used for sensitive equipment transport, and it was already open. The locks had been disengaged from the inside. Madison moved toward it. Inside was not weapons, not intelligence files, not anything she had been briefed to expect. It was a communications array, specialized, expensive, in broadcasting on a frequency she recognized immediately because she had been trained to recognize it. It was a domestic military channel, encrypted, the kind used not for field operations, but for direct command-level communication between theaters. Someone had been using this location to talk to someone inside the United States military command structure. She reached for it, and the building exploded. The blast hit from above and to the right, which meant the upper level had detonated a charge, not a random ambush, but a shaped explosion designed to collapse the interior without destroying the structure from the outside. Madison was thrown into the far wall with a force that knocked her rifle loose and drove her left leg into the concrete support beam at an angle that sent white agony screaming up through her hip and spine. She hit the ground and could not immediately move her leg. She could move her arms. She could think. Her ears were ringing so hard that the world had reduced itself to a high-frequency whine in the taste of blood. She reached for her radio. Contact, contact, she said, because the training never stops, even when your body is trying to convince you it already has. I have casualties in the lower level. I need extraction now. Walker, I need you to confirm my position. Gunfire erupted above her. She could hear her soldiers engaging, could hear voices she recognized calling out positions and threats in the organized language of people who had trained together and were now fighting together, which meant her team was still functional, still fighting, still alive. She dragged herself forward. Her leg would not support weight, but it would accept being dragged, and Madison Reed had crawled out of worse situations than this. Maybe not many worse, but worse. Holt, she said into the radio. Ortega, talk to me. Holt's hit. Ortega's voice came back tight and fast. Minor, he's moving. Upper corridor is active. We've got 6 tangos, maybe 8. Commander Walker is pulling the team toward the east exit. What's Walker's status on extraction? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. He's moving toward the exit, Captain. He's got the case. Madison stopped dragging herself and looked up at the ceiling of the corridor as if the concrete could explain something to her. Ortega, tell me Walker is setting up the extraction from the outside. Another pause. Captain, Ortega's voice had changed. The operational tightness had dropped out of it and something much more complicated had taken its place. He ordered the team out, all of them. He listed you as a sound that might have been interference or might have been a young soldier swallowing something she didn't want to say. He called it in as KIA, Captain. Your position. The ringing in Madison's ears became something else. She pressed the radio to her mouth and said very carefully, repeat that, specialist. He reported you as killed in action. Ortega's voice broke on the last word. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Captain. I didn't know until he said it, and then he ordered us out, and I can't. He's got command authority. I can't override. Get out, Madison said, not harshly, with absolute clarity. Ortega, get out of the building right now. Take Holt and get clear. Captain, that's an order. She paused. Tell me when you're clear. She heard movement, heard Ortega's breathing, heard the distant percussion of the engagement above going quieter as positions shifted. She used that time to pull herself another 6 feet down the corridor toward the communications array that was still sitting in the middle of the floor, still broadcasting, because the explosion had not been large enough to destroy the lower level. It had only been large enough to make the lower level inaccessible from above. She reached the array. Her hands moved over it by instinct, by training, by the part of her mind that never stopped functioning, even when everything else was dissolving. She pulled the data card from the broadcast unit and put it in her chest pocket. Then her radio crackled one final time. Not Ortega's voice, not Holt's voice, Nathan Walker's voice. I've reported your position, he said, and she understood what that meant before he finished speaking. I'm sorry, Madison. The airstrike was 15 minutes out. She knew it because she knew how these things were called. She knew the timing protocols. She knew that 15 minutes was not a long time when your leg was broken and the exit was on the upper level of a building that was currently being used as a firefight, and the man with command authority had already written your obituary. She also knew that 15 minutes was an eternity if you stopped wasting it on grief. Madison Reed pressed her back against the corridor wall, took one full breath that went all the way down and started moving. She did not cry. She would not have told you she didn't want to. She might have told you there wasn't time, which was true. She might have told you that anger is cleaner than grief in a burning building, which was also true. She might have told you that Nathan Walker's voice saying her name like an apology was already something she was packing down into a place inside her chest where she could carry it without it costing her anything she needed right now. What she needed right now was a way out. The lower corridor ran another 40 meters east before it branched. She knew this from the briefing map, which she had memorized not because she expected to need it in the dark on a broken leg, but because memorizing the map is what you do. The eastern branch led to a maintenance access tunnel that appeared in the satellite imagery to exit through a ventilation shaft near the base of the rock face. The shaft would be narrow. It would be painful. It would require her to drag her body through approximately 20 meters of confined space on her arms alone. She had done worse. She told herself this several times during the 40 meters it took her to reach the branch, each repetition becoming slightly less convincing and slightly more necessary. The maintenance tunnel was exactly where the map said it was. She entered it head first, pulled the broken leg in behind her, and started moving. Above her, the building was still active. She could feel it through the rock vibration from movement, from weapons, from the structural settling that happens when a building has been damaged but hasn't decided to fall yet. She did not know if her soldiers were safe. She did not know if the airstrike coordinates had been confirmed. She knew only the next handhold, the next forward inch, the next breath. She made it 8 meters into the tunnels before the pain in her leg became something that required active management, meaning she had to decide with every forward pull whether to let the pain exist or to do something with it. She decided to be angry. Anger has edges. Anger keeps you moving. Grief has no edges. It spreads. She was angry at Nathan for the obvious reasons: the betrayal, the abandonment, the casual efficiency with which he had erased her from the mission record. But she was also angry at herself because she was not sure when she had stopped seeing him clearly. She had loved him. She had believed that love and military competence could coexist in a person, that a man could have both capability and conscience, that the qualities that made someone good in the field could be the same qualities that made someone worth trusting in the quiet. She had been wrong. At 12 meters, she heard the first sounds of the airstrike sequence, not the strike itself, but the signal aircraft, the low drone that precedes confirmation. She had approximately 7 minutes. She moved faster. At 16 meters, her right arm found empty space where solid tunnel should have been, and she realized she had reached the shaft junction. She turned, assessed by touch, found the vertical shaft climbing upward to the right. No ladder. Of course there was no ladder. She braced her one functional leg and her arms against the shaft walls and began to climb the way you climb when you have no other options. Badly, painfully, with full commitment to continuing regardless of the cost. She came out of the shaft on her stomach, scraping through the ventilation grate that gave way under her body weight, and dropped onto the rock face outside the building in the cold night air. She lay there for exactly 4 seconds. Then she rolled because the airstrike was coming, and 4 seconds of lying still was already too long. She got 20 meters clear of the building's footprint before the first impact hit. The force pushed her flat. The sound was enormous, and then nothing. Her eardrums registered the pressure and went temporarily silent, and she existed for a moment in a world of pure concussion and light. Debris moved over her. Heat moved over her. Then it passed the way extreme things always eventually pass, and Madison Reed was still on the ground and still breathing, and the building that Nathan Walker had reported as her grave was burning behind her in the Afghan mountain night. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel relief. She felt the data card in her chest pocket, ardent specific against her ribs, and she felt the pain in her leg that would need to be addressed very soon, or the decision to survive the airstrike would become academic. And she felt beneath everything else a question beginning to form, not about Nathan, not about the mission, but about the case he had carried out of the building, the way he had moved to secure it before ordering her abandon the broadcast frequency she had recognized on the communications array. The question was this: what had Nathan Walker actually come to that building to do? Not to capture a target, not to recover enemy intelligence. Something else, something that required Madison Reed to be dead before she could ask that question. She pulled herself upright against a boulder. looked out across the mountain terrain in the direction that was away from the burning building and away from the direction a helicopter extraction would most likely come from, and started calculating. She had a broken leg, no radio, no visible allies, and an active enemy force somewhere above and behind her. She had the clothes she was wearing, the sidearm that had somehow stayed in its holster through the explosion and the tunnel, and the climb one full magazine, and a partial a combat knife, and a data card whose contents she had not yet been able to read. She also had every piece of training she had accumulated over 12 years of special operations service. And she had something else. She had the clear, unambiguous knowledge that Colonel Nathan Walker believed she was dead. In her experience, the most dangerous thing you could do to someone who betrayed you was survive them. She began to move. The terrain to the northwest was rough but navigable. She had memorized that too, the topography, the likely patrol routes, the dead ground where she could move without being visible from the high points. She was not moving fast. She was moving correctly, which over distance matters more than speed. Every step on the broken leg sent a signal up her spine that her body interpreted as emergency and her mind interpreted as information. She could bear weight if she moved a certain way. She could not bear weight the other way. She adjusted accordingly. Within an hour, she had put 3 kilometers between herself and the burning building. Within 2 hours, she had found a position, a natural shelf of rock on the north face, recessed and covered, invisible from below and from the air, where she could stop and assess her situation with something approaching clarity. She took the data card from her chest pocket. She held it up in the dark and thought about what kind of device she could access it, with which led to the thought of the equipment she did have on her, which led to the discovery that the explosion had damaged but not destroyed a secondary reader in her vest pocket, a backup unit she carried out of habit, the way soldiers carry backup of everything, because the primary unit always fails at the worst possible moment. She coaxed the reader to function. It took 4 minutes of manual work and 2 minutes of the reader's internal processor trying to remember what it was supposed to do. Then the data card opened, and Madison Reed read the first 3 pages of what was on it and understood why Nathan Walker needed her dead. It was not enemy intelligence. It was not a standard military communications record. It was a financial ledger. Payments, dates, account numbers, names she recognized, not all of them, but enough. Enough to understand the shape of what she was looking at. Enough to understand that the operation she had just survived was not a military mission to neutralize a threat. It was a business transaction. Someone had paid for access to that building, for access to that broadcast network, for access to the kind of command authority that could call an airstrike on a specific set of coordinates and have it executed without question. Nathan Walker's name appeared 14 times in the first 15 pages. North Star Strategic Solutions appeared 22 times. She read until the reader's battery ran out, by which point she had read enough. The man she had loved, the man who had promised to marry her, the man who had ordered her death with the same calm efficiency he applied to everything he touched, was not a commander who had made a terrible choice under pressure. I was something she had never considered him capable of being, a man who had been working against everything they were supposed to stand for since before she had ever trusted him. Madison Reed sat in the cold dark on the side of an Afghan mountain with a broken leg and a dead data reader, and a name she would not speak aloud for fear of what her own voice would sound like saying it, and she made a decision that was also a promise. She was going to survive this. Not for Nathan, not even entirely for justice. She was going to survive this because somewhere out there were soldiers who trusted their commanders the way she once had, and someone needed to stand between that trust and the people who would use it as a weapon. She looked up at the mountain sky, breathed the cold air all the way in, and started planning. She was not dead. Nathan Walker was going to find out what that meant. She moved through the night without a destination, which sounds like desperation, but was actually the opposite. Madison Reed had learned a long time ago that when you have no clear objective, you build one from what you have not, from what you wish you had. What she had was a broken leg, a dead data reader, a sidearm, and information that could end careers, end lives, and potentially end a conspiracy that had been running long enough to have a name on a financial ledger. What she wished she had was irrelevant. She stopped thinking about it somewhere around the 4th kilometer and focused entirely on the ground in front of her. The leg was the problem she had to solve first. She found what she needed, 2 lengths of branch weight material stripped from a scrub growth along the rock face and the strapping from her secondary vest panel, and she made herself stop moving long enough to do the work properly. Wrapping a field splint on your own broken leg in the dark without making noise is an exercise in controlled suffering. She did it methodically the way she did everything, not because she wasn't hurting, but because hurting loudly was a luxury she couldn't afford. When she was done, she tested the weight distribution, adjusted the strapping twice, and stood. It would hold. Not forever, not even for the kind of distance she needed to cover. But long enough, she moved. By dawn, she had cleared the most dangerous section of the approach terrain and found herself working along a dried riverbed that had probably been a patrol route at some point based on the vehicle track impressions still faintly readable in the hardened ground. She avoided the center of it, kept to the edges where her own tracks would blend into the existing disturbance, and thought about the data card. She had read 43 pages before the reader died. 43 pages of dates payments, account transfers, and operational summaries, written in the kind of language that civilian lawyers use when they want documents to be technically accurate and functionally incomprehensible. But Madison had been briefed on enough classified financial investigations to read the shape of it even without the detail. What she had was a piece of something much larger. The piece she had was damning enough on its own. The rest of it, wherever the rest of it was, would be catastrophic for the people whose names she had seen, including Nathan's. She thought about Nathan the way you have to think about someone you were wrong about, not with the story you told yourself while you loved them, but with the version that existed before you started editing it. She thought about specific moments. The meeting she hadn't been invited to that she had assumed was above her clearance level and had never questioned. The deployment timeline changes he had requested for this operation, which she had attributed to his thoroughness and now understood as choreography. The way he had twice in the last 8 months inserted himself into the chain of communication between her team and the intelligence analysts in a way that seemed like command efficiency and now seemed like information control. She had not been blind. She had been trusting. There was a difference. She was no longer in the business of making that distinction feel like a comfort. By mid-morning, she had reached a position where she could see a secondary road, unpaved, unmarked on any military map she had been given, but real. Someone used this road regularly. The tire tracks were recent. She crouched behind a rock formation and watched it for 40 minutes. On the 41st minute, a vehicle appeared from the eastern direction. It was not military. It was a local transport vehicle, the kind used by contractors and aid workers and journalists, and anyone who needed to move through difficult terrain without attracting the attention that military markings would bring. It slowed as it approached the bend nearest her position, which meant the driver was familiar with the road and familiar with the curve's difficulty. Madison made a decision in the space of about 2 seconds. She stood up and stepped onto the road. The vehicle stopped. She had her hands visible, her posture deliberate, nothing aggressive in her body language, except the inescapable fact that she was an American woman in tactical gear, with a field-splinted leg standing in the middle of a mountain road in eastern Afghanistan, and that combination of facts communicated its own kind of urgency. The driver's window came down. "I need help," she said, in English because she needed to know immediately whether that was going to work or not. The driver was a man in his 50s, with the kind of face that has spent a significant portion of its existence outdoors and in complicated situations. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the leg. He looked at her hands. "American military," he said. His English was accented but exact. "Yes." "You are alone." "Yes." Another long look. "There was a strike last night on the mountain facility." "I know," Madison said. "I was inside when it happened." Something moved through his expression that she read as calculation but also as something more basic. A man deciding whether the trouble of helping someone was worth the cost of not helping them. She had seen that calculation before. She had learned not to try to influence it because the people who thought their way to yes were far more reliable than the people who had been persuaded. "Get in," he said. His name was Hamid. He was a logistics coordinator for a regional aid organization which explained the vehicle and the road knowledge and the matter-of-fact manner with which he accepted a wounded American soldier appearing from the mountain at dawn. He had seen stranger things, he told her, and his tone suggested this was not an invitation to ask about them. He drove her to a settlement 2 hours east, where a medical clinic operated out of a converted structure, staffed by 2 rotating volunteers and 1 permanently assigned nurse practitioner named Elena, who looked at Madison's leg with the focused expression of someone who has seen this kind of injury before and developed an opinion about people who try to field treat it themselves. "You set this yourself," Elena said. "I did. It's wrong. I know, it got me here." Elena looked at her for a moment. "Can you tell me what happened?" "No," Madison said. "Not all of it. I need you to understand that without taking it personally." A pause, then Elena nodded once. "Do you need to make a call?" "More than almost anything," Madison said. The phone she was given was a satellite unit older, not military spec, but functional. She dialed a number she had memorized 3 years ago as a contingency and had never expected to use. It rang 4 times. "This is a secure line. Identify yourself." "This is Captain Madison Reed, Special Operations Serial Number 4447, Bravo 22291. I am calling from a non-military location in eastern Afghanistan. I am injured and off-grid. I need you to confirm my status in the system." A silence. "Then Captain Reed, your status in the current operational record is listed as KIA, reported 14 hours ago by Colonel Nathan Walker." She had known it was coming. She had known it since Ortega's voice broke on the radio in the burning building. Hearing it stated flatly from a voice she didn't recognize through a borrowed satellite phone at a medical clinic in the middle of the morning. She was lucky to be alive, for that was different. Her jaw tightened. Her voice didn't change. "I am not KIA, she said. "I need you to flag this call and hold it for counterintelligence review. Do not route it through the standard chain. The standard chain is compromised. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Another silence, longer this time. "Can you verify your authority to make that designation?" "I can verify my identity and my location and the fact that I'm breathing," she said. "The designation stands on its own." A commanding officer reported his own soldier as KIA while she was still alive and then called an airstrike on her position. That is not a field error. That is a command decision. And I need it reviewed outside the standard reporting structure, or it disappears into the same chain that produced it. The person on the other end was quiet for long enough that Madison began calculating alternatives. "Then I'm routing this to a secondary flag. It will reach the appropriate desk within 6 hours. Can you maintain this contact?" "No, I'll call back on this line in 8 hours. If it's clean, we talk. If it's not, I find another way." She ended the call. Elena was watching her from across the room with the expression of a woman who has learned that the less she knows about certain things, the longer she remains useful. "Your leg needs more than field strapping," Elena said. "I know. I can stabilize it properly. It will take an hour and it will hurt." "Okay. Are you going to tell me anything about why a decorated American officer is calling a flag line from my clinic instead of her own unit?" Madison looked at her for a moment. "I can tell you that the people I need to avoid finding me right now have the ability to access my unit's communication records, and that I am grateful for your help, and that when this is over, I will make sure you have whatever documentation you need to confirm that you acted appropriately." Elena absorbed this. "Is it going to be over?" "Yes," Madison said. It was the first time she had said it out loud. She heard the weight of it in her own voice, not performance, not reassurance, but something settled. The decision had been made somewhere on that mountain in the dark, and what she said to Elena was just the first time she was reporting it to someone else. It was going to be over. She just had to get there. While Elena worked on her leg, Madison lay flat on the clinic table and ran through everything she knew in sequence, building the kind of mental architecture that special operations training demands, not emotion, first analysis, first emotion managed alongside. Nathan had taken the case. The case had likely contained the original document, set that the data card she now carried was a subset of, which meant Nathan knew the card existed. He would have audited the communications array before or after the explosion, and if the data card was missing, he would know someone had taken it. He would have assumed, based on the evidence available to him, that whoever took it died in the strike. But he would not assume forever. He was too careful for forever. At some point, maybe days, maybe a week, he would run the full account and discover that the card was not in the debris and not in any evidence log, and he would have to consider the possibility that it had been recovered by someone who survived. He would have to consider the possibility that she survived, which meant her timeline was not open-ended. Elena finished. The leg felt different, still, Broken, still, painful, but supported in a way that might actually last. Thank you, Madison said, and meant it in a way that covered more than the medical work. Don't thank me, Elena said. Just don't end up back here in the same condition. Madison slept for 4 hours, which was 3 hours longer than she expected, and exactly as long as her body decided to take regardless of what her mind thought about the schedule. She woke with the kind of clarity that comes after extreme exhaustion. Everything simplified, everything obvious. No room for the secondary thoughts that complicate action. She called the flag line at the 8-hour mark. A different voice answered. Captain Reed? Yes. My name is Colonel Diane Ferris. I'm with the Inspector General's Office Special Investigations Division. I need you to understand that this line is as clean as I can make it on short notice, which means it is clean enough for this conversation and not clean enough for extended operational detail. Do you understand? Yes. Your status flag generated 3 secondary alerts when it went into the system. 2 of them were from people I know. 1 of them was from someone I don't know who had access to the flag system that I wasn't aware they had. That tells me your assessment of a compromised chain is accurate. It also tells me someone is monitoring for your name. Madison's hand tightened on the phone. I have physical evidence, she said, partial, 43 pages of a financial operational ledger connecting a domestic defense contractor to illegal procurement and supply operations. Multiple military personnel named. The document structure suggests a larger file of which this is a subset. What contractor? North Star Strategic Solutions. A pause that had texture to it, not surprise exactly. More like confirmation. How did you get it? I pulled it from a communications array inside the target facility before the explosion. It was broadcasting on a domestic command frequency. And the person who ordered the strike on your position, Colonel Nathan Walker. This pause was longer. You understand what you're alleging. I understand exactly what I'm alleging, Madison said, which is why I'm making it to you instead of to his chain of command, since 3 of the 14 entries with his name reference operational decisions that would have required command-level sign-off above his rank. This goes up. Where are you? I'll tell you that when I know how we're moving this forward. You don't trust me. Colonel Ferris, 12 hours ago, I trusted a man I was engaged to marry, and he called an airstrike on me. You'll understand if I'm rebuilding my trust criteria from scratch. Something shifted in Ferris's voice. Not amusement exactly, but something adjacent to respect. Fair, she said. Here's what I can offer you. I have an investigative team that operates outside the standard reporting structure. They've been looking at North Star for 14 months. They have enough to know something is wrong and not enough to move on it. What you're describing could be the piece that changes that. But I need you alive, and I need that card. Then we need to talk about extraction that doesn't go through any channel Nathan Walker can access. Give me 24 hours. I'll give you 18. Another pause, shorter this time. Understood. Madison ended the call and sat with the phone in her hands for a moment, running through the conversation, looking for the places where Ferris could have said something wrong, and didn't the places where her responses had been too prepared or too convenient. She found 2 points of minor concern and 3 points that felt genuinely unscripted, and she decided the ratio was acceptable. Not comfortable. Acceptable. She was operating in a world where acceptable was the new excellent. Hamid found her sitting in the clinic's outer room an hour later. Someone was asking about you, he said. She looked at him. In the settlement, man arrived 2 hours ago, not local, asking questions about whether anyone had seen an American woman. He said it with the flat economy of a man reporting facts, not editorializing, not dramatizing. He was not military. He was using civilian cover. How long ago did he leave? He hasn't. He is still in the settlement. Madison stood. The leg protested. She overruled it. Is there another way out of this building? Hamid looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and pointed to the back of the clinic without a word. She went through the back, moved along the outer wall of the building in the direction away from the settlement's main gathering area, and found a position where she could see the approach without being visible from it. The man was not hard to identify, not because he was obvious, but because Hamid had described his behavior accurately, and behavior always gives you more than appearance. He was asking questions in a way that looked casual and wasn't. He was positioned near the main road in a way that looked accidental and wasn't. He was the kind of professional who had learned to look like an amateur. She had been trained to spot that specific performance. She watched him for 12 minutes. He had a communication device not visible, but she could see the moments when he paused and tilted his head slightly, the unconscious adjustment people make when they're listening to an earpiece. He was receiving instruction, which meant he had a handler, which meant this was not a solo operation. Nathan was not leaving the missing data card to chance. She pulled back from the position, returned to the clinic through the back entrance, and found Elena and Hamid both watching her. "I need to move," she said. "Today. Now." "Your leg," Elena began. "Will come with me either way," Madison said. "Is there a vehicle you can loan or arrange?" Hamid looked at Elena. Elena looked at the ceiling for approximately 2 seconds. Then she looked back at Madison. "There is a supply convoy leaving this afternoon heading toward the border station at Kaust. The driver owes me a significant professional favor." "I don't need to know about the favor." "No," Elena agreed. "You don't." Hamid made a call. The call was short. He set down the phone and said 2 hours. Madison had 2 hours and a man outside in the settlement who was waiting for her to appear. She spent the first 30 minutes going through the clinic's limited supply inventory with Elena, supplementing her medical situation to the extent possible with what was available. She spent the next 40 minutes going back through every page of the data card she had read, reconstructing it from memory with as much precision as she could manage, writing the reconstructed elements in a code of her own construction on the back of 3 sheets of clinic supply order forms. Because if she lost the card or the card was taken, she was not going to lose the information with it. In the last 50 minutes, she thought about Nathan. Not with grief. She had made her decision about grief on the mountain. She thought about him tactically, which was the version of thinking about someone you do when you need to predict what they'll do next. Nathan was thorough. Nathan was patient. Nathan operated from a framework of risk management that always prioritized the elimination of variables over the acceptance of uncertainty. He had taken the case. He had ordered the strike. He had reported her dead. Those 3 actions in that sequence constituted a complete operational closeout. He believed he had eliminated the variable that she represented. But the data card was missing from the debris report. He would know this by now, and Nathan, being Nathan, would calculate the probability that the card had been recovered by someone who survived, and he would calculate that probability as low but non-zero. And he would act on it the same way he acted on every non-zero probability, systematically, thoroughly, and without hesitation. The man outside was step 1. Steps 2, 3, and 4 would follow, unless she moved faster than his calculation expected. She needed to get to someone who could receive the data card physically, someone with the authority and the organizational independence to act on it, someone outside the chain that Nathan had access to. Ferris was that person if Ferris was what she appeared to be, and the only way to confirm that was to get to her. The convoy driver's name was Tariq, and he asked no questions, which Madison appreciated more than she could say. She climbed into the cab with the leg elevated on a rolled supply blanket, the data card in its reader tucked inside her jacket against her chest, and the reconstructed notes folded into her boot. Elena stood at the clinic entrance as the vehicle moved. She didn't wave. Madison didn't wave either. But something passed between them. The particular acknowledgement of 2 women who understood what it meant to operate in a world that frequently underestimated them, and to have decided separately and long ago that underestimation was the other person's problem. The convoy moved east. Tariq drove without speaking for the first hour, and Madison used that time to watch the road behind them through the side mirror. Nothing followed, which either meant the man in the settlement hadn't identified the convoy as her exit route, or it meant he had identified it and didn't want her to know he was following. She considered both possibilities equally and decided that the second one was more consistent with the level of operational competency Nathan would have deployed. She told Tariq, without explaining why, that she needed him to vary his route if possible in the second hour. He glanced at her. "There is only one route to Kaust. Then vary your speed. Stop twice for at least 8 minutes each time. Make it look like a mechanical issue." He thought about this for a moment. "You think someone is behind us?" "I think someone might be. And if they are, then I need to know before we reach the border station." Tariq was quiet for another kilometer. "Then the first stop will be in 40 minutes. There is a position where I always check the rear differential." It is known that I do this. It will not look unusual. Thank you. You are welcome. A pause. Elena has helped my family. I don't ask what she needs in return. This is the same. Madison looked out the side mirror again. The road behind them was empty in the way roads are sometimes genuinely empty and sometimes carefully emptied. On the first stop, she got out of the cab, under cover of Tariq's mechanical inspection, and moved around to the rear of the convoy to watch the road from a position that anyone following would not expect to be occupied. She waited 7 minutes. On the 6th minute, a vehicle appeared on the road behind them, a commercial truck, moving at an unremarkable speed, stopping its forward progress when Tariq's convoy stopped. It stopped too cleanly. The distance it maintained was too precise. She memorized the vehicle's profile and got back in the cab. We have a tail, she said. Tariq absorbed this without visible agitation. The border station is 90 minutes away. There will be additional traffic as we approach. A single vehicle maintaining that position will become more conspicuous. Unless they hand off. Yes, he drove. Unless they hand off. She took out the phone Elena had pressed into her hand at the clinic door. A different one than the satellite unit, a basic cellular unit with a local SIM, and called the only number she had for Ferris. It rang twice. You're moving? Ferris said, not a question. Yes, I have a physical tail, professional. I believe it's connected to Walker's network. Are you going to make the border? I think so. What happens when I get there? There is a flight operating from Coast Airfield on a contractor manifest. My people pulled a slot on it. Your name is not on the manifest. The name is Sarah Connell, and I'm transmitting the documentation to a print terminal at the border station's administrative office. You'll need to ask for the station administrator named Priya Osman. Tell her the package is from Ferris. She'll know what it means. How do I know you didn't just transmit my location to Nathan Walker? You don't, Ferris said. That's the position we're both in right now. I can tell you that the 14 months I spent building this case against North Star cost me 2 analysts who were moved out of my division under unclear circumstances, and 1 informant who stopped returning calls after his cover identity was flagged in a system only Walker's command tier had access to. I can tell you that this is personal for me in a way that professional investigations are not supposed to be. I can tell you that the only thing I want more than what's on that data card is to put the people whose names are on it in front of a federal grand jury. A pause. But I can't prove any of that to you through a cell phone in the next 30 seconds. You're going to have to make a judgment call. Madison looked at this road ahead. She thought about what it cost to trust someone. She thought about what it cost not to. I'll be at the border station in 90 minutes, she said. If Priya Osman exists, I'll know you're real. She exists, Ferris said. The line went quiet. Tariq drove. The vehicle behind them maintained its distance through the second hour. Then at approximately 40 kilometers from the border station, where the road began to accumulate more traffic, it fell back and a different vehicle moved into the following position. The handoff was clean and competent. Madison watched it happen and felt the particular combination of professional respect and personal anger that comes from watching someone do their job well in service of trying to destroy you. She did not allow the anger to surface. She used it for fuel, which was the only appropriate use of it right now. The border station was busy. Tariq brought the convoy to the checkpoint with the practiced ease of a man who had done this hundreds of times, which worked in her favor, because her exit from the bus and her movement toward the administrative building required her to look like someone who belonged, and belonging is mostly about pace and direction, not about paperwork. She found the administrative office. She opened the door. Behind the counter was a woman in her 30s with the particular expression of someone who manages logistics for a living, organized, measured, and slightly skeptical of anything that disrupts the organization. I'm looking for Priya Osman, Madison said. Speaking. I was told a package was sent from Ferris. Priya looked at her for exactly 1 second, the kind of look that is actually an assessment, and then reached under the counter and retrieved a sealed document envelope. She set it on the counter. The flight departs in 40 minutes, she said. You'll want to move through processing quickly. Your documentation is in order. Madison took the envelope. It had weight. Real documents, multiple layers, the kind of thing that takes organizational infrastructure to produce, not improvisation. She opened it and checked. It was complete, thorough. The name was Sarah Connell, and it held up to everything a manual document check would require. "Is there a tail that came in with the convoy behind me?" Madison asked. Priya's expression did not change. "There are 3 vehicles that entered the station after your convoy that are not currently in active processing queues. They are parked." "Waiting." "Waiting," Priya confirmed. Madison thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Is there a second exit from this station?" "The airfield access road runs along the north perimeter. It is technically staff and crew only. And if a traveler with valid flight documentation needed to access the airfield directly for a medical reason, then I would call ahead to the airfield to notify them of the incoming passenger, and they would provide direct escort." Priya looked at Madison's leg. A leg injury that required a direct path would be consistent with that procedure. "I appreciate your thoroughness," Madison said. "I appreciate passengers who board their flights on time," Priya said and picked up the phone. The airfield escort was a young man named Yusuf, who walked at exactly the right pace, fast enough to be purposeful, slow enough that Madison's leg didn't become a problem, and said nothing beyond the necessary. He walked her through the north perimeter access, across the airfield apron, and to the boarding ramp of a contractor aircraft that looked completely unremarkable and was, in Madison's estimation, anything but. She boarded. She found her seat. She sat down and felt the full weight of the last 36 hours land on her in one organized patient wave, not overwhelming, just present. Everything that had happened, everything she had done, everything she now carried in her chest pocket, in her boot, in her memory. The aircraft began to move. Through the small oval window, she watched the border station recede. Somewhere in that station, 3 vehicles were sitting in a parking area, waiting for a dead woman to walk out of the administrative building. She pressed her back against the seat and closed her eyes. The data card was safe. She was moving. She was alive. But somewhere between the border station and wherever this aircraft was taking her, she was going to have to decide exactly how far she was willing to go. Not to survive. She had already answered that question, but to win. Because surviving was not the same as winning. And Nathan Walker was still out there, still operating, still carrying the rest of the document set that matched the 43 pages she had read on the side of a mountain, still making decisions from a position of authority he had stolen from every soldier who had ever trusted him. She opened her eyes. She reached into her jacket and held the data card in her closed fist. He had wanted her dead because she knew too much. He had no idea yet how much she had learned since he left her. The aircraft landed at a private airfield outside Fredericksburg, Virginia at 4:17 in the morning, and the first thing Madison noticed when the ramp came down was that Colonel Diane Ferris was standing on the tarmac in person. That meant something. A handler who sends people to meet you is managing assets. A handler who shows up herself is invested. Madison had learned to read the difference in what she read in Ferris's posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she was standing slightly forward of her support staff. Not behind them was someone who had skin in this game that went beyond professional obligation. She came down the ramp on the leg that Elena had stabilized, and Ferris met her at the bottom. "You look like you've had a difficult week," Ferris said. 38 hours, Madison said. "It just had a high density." Ferris looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of someone cataloging condition rather than making conversation. Then she said, "Vehicle, now we talk on the move." They moved. The vehicle was a standard government fleet car, intentionally unremarkable, the kind that disappears in traffic because it looks like every other unremarkable thing on the highway. 2 of Ferris's people were in the front. Ferris and Madison were in the back, and Ferris pulled the privacy divider closed before she spoke. "The flag your contact generated 14 hours ago produced a secondary alert in a system that Walker's people monitor," Ferris said. "They know you're alive." Madison absorbed this without visible reaction. "How long have they known?" "I estimate 8 to 10 hours, possibly less. They've been careful not to move in ways that would confirm they know, which tells me they're deciding how to respond." "Which means Nathan is deciding," Madison said. "Yes. He'll move to protect the document set first, before he moves against me. He'll want the primary file secured somewhere I can't access it before he deals with the fact that I'm alive." Ferris nodded slowly. "That's consistent with his pattern. He spent the last 14 months moving assets rather than exposing himself directly. His instinct under pressure is to consolidate, not confront." "Where is he right now?" "Stateside. He arrived 6 days ago. He's been operating from a private estate in Loudoun County that North Star has under a shell company. The property has its own communication infrastructure. Ferris looked at her directly. We've had eyes on the property for 3 months. We've been waiting for a legal predicate to move. And the data card, Ferris reached into her jacket and produced a slim, technical reader, newer than the one Madison had carried military spec. The card you have is the predicate. If what you described is on it, we have enough for a federal judge to sign on a full warrant package tonight. Madison reached into her jacket and held the card for a moment. This was the moment. She had been carrying this card for 38 hours through a broken building, a mountain, a medical clinic, a convoy, and a border crossing. She had protected it with the same totality she applied to her soldiers, not because it was valuable in the abstract, but because she knew what it represented. Every page of that ledger was someone who had decided that a soldier's life was a line item. Every transaction was a choice someone made with full knowledge to perpetuate a conflict that killed real people in exchange for money. She handed Ferris the card. Ferris took it with both hands, which Madison noticed and respected, not a casual grab, but a deliberate receipt, the kind of gesture that acknowledges the weight of what's being transferred. I need a doctor, Madison said, in 8 hours. You'll have both, Ferris said, and then I need you to walk me through everything you remember from the 43 pages. Every name, every date, every transaction detail you can reconstruct. I already reconstructed it, Madison said, and reached into her boot and produced the folded supply order sheets covered in her coded notation. She held them out. Start with the 3rd page, North Star's account transfers from the Cyprus routing structure. That's where the military chain enters. Ferris took the pages. She unfolded the first one, looked at it, and was quiet for a moment. You wrote this from memory, she said. I wrote it while I still had the reader. Then I kept it in case the card was taken. Ferris looked up from the page. How complete is it? 91%, Madison said. The gaps are in the numerical sequences. I got every name. For the first time since Madison had seen her on the tarmac, something shifted in Ferris's expression. Not relief too early for relief, but something that looked like the moment when a person who has been pushing against a wall for a very long time feels the wall begin to move. Okay, Ferris said quietly. Okay. They drove in silence for a moment, and Madison looked out the window at the highway moving past in the dark and thought about how strange it was to be alive. Not grateful exactly. Gratitude requires a settled state, and she was nowhere near settled. But aware, specifically vividly aware of being present in a moment that should not have been available to her. Nathan had been thorough. He had just miscalculated the variable he was trying to eliminate. The safe house was a federal property outside Manassas, clean, functional, occupied by 3 members of Ferris's investigative team, who greeted Madison with the focused attention of people who have been working a case for a long time and just received information that changes everything. A doctor arrived within the hour, assessed the leg, confirmed Elena's stabilization as competent, and delivered an honest evaluation. Surgery was needed. A walking cast could manage the interim, and Madison should under no circumstances use the leg as if it were functional. Madison thanked him, put the walking cast on, and stood up. I said under no circumstances, the doctor repeated. I heard you, Madison said. I'm not walking anywhere. I'm sitting in a room and talking for the next 8 hours. The cast is for afterwards. He gave her the particular look of medical professionals who have learned that arguing with soldiers is a professional courtesy that goes unappreciated and left. Ferris's lead analyst, a compact, precise woman named Agent Vera Solis, who had the energy of someone who had been awake for at least 20 hours and would be awake for 20 more without complaint, set up a recording session, and Madison spent the next 4 hours walking through everything. Every page, every name, every number she remembered, every contextual detail that the dry financial language of the ledger couldn't convey, what the transactions meant in operational terms, how the money had moved, what the command level approvals would have required, where the chain of accountability ran and where it terminated. It terminated with Nathan Walker, and it did not stop there. 2 names above his in the approval chain were names she had not recognized on her first read, but which Solis recognized immediately and visibly, the kind of recognition that comes with a sharp intake of breath and a very deliberate effort to return the expression to neutral. You know those names, Madison said. Yes, Solis said. How high? Solis looked at Ferris. Ferris looked at Madison. High enough, Ferris said, that when this goes to a federal judge tonight, I'm going to need the warrant sealed for 48 hours before any notification goes up the standard chain. Because the standard chain has a significant leak problem at a level we were not previously aware of. Madison was quiet for a moment. You didn't know the chain reached that high. We knew North Star had access above Walker's level. We didn't know the specific names. Ferris held her gaze. This changes the scope of what we're moving against. It also changes the risk, Madison said. Yes, because the people who are above Nathan in this chain have the kind of access that can make a federal warrant disappear before a judge finishes signing it. Which is why, Ferris said, we are not filing with the standard federal process. We have a relationship with a federal judge who operates outside the D.C. circuit for exactly these situations. His record on sealed intelligence cases is clean. We've used him twice before. She paused. I need the warrant filed by 6 a.m. to make the timing work. That gives us approximately 90 minutes. Then stop talking to me and go file it, Madison said. Ferris almost smiled. She stood, collected the reconstructed notes in the data card which Solis had already imaged onto a secure server, and went to the door. Rest, she said. I will, Madison said, after you tell me where Nathan Walker is right now. Ferris stopped at the door. Loudoun County, the estate. Is he moving? Our surveillance reported him active approximately 2 hours ago. Phone calls, internal security personnel repositioning. He's consolidating. She turned to face Madison fully. He knows you're alive, and he's preparing. For what? We think he's preparing to move the primary document set. If he gets it out of the estate to a secondary location we don't have identified, we may not recover it. Madison stood. The leg protested in the organized, specific way that properly stabilized injuries protest pain with structure, which is manageable. She took 2 steps and stopped. The warrant, she said, can it be filed for both the property search and a personal detainment order? If we have sufficient evidence for both categories, yes. Then file both. Because if Nathan moves that document set before you execute the property search, you'll need the detainment order to prevent him from communicating its new location to anyone above him in the chain. If he makes one phone call after you take him, those names disappear. You know that. Ferris looked at her for a long moment. The detainment order requires a higher evidence threshold. I know. Use my testimony. Use the card. Use the reconstructed notes. Use the fact that he reported a living soldier as KIA and called an airstrike on her position. That's not a gray area. That's a federal crime with a living witness who is standing in this room. Another pause. It'll hold, Ferris said finally. Then file it. Ferris left. Madison sat back down. She closed her eyes for a moment and ran through what she knew, not the evidence, not the case structure, but the human element. Nathan, his patterns, his instincts, the way he operated when he felt pressure building. She had spent 2 years alongside this man in operational environments, and she had watched him make decisions under pressure more times than she could count. He did not panic. He did not act rashly. He methodically identified his highest value asset and protected it first. The primary document set was his highest value asset right now. It was leverage. It was proof of what other people had done alongside him, which meant it was the one thing that kept him protected from the people above him in the chain. Because if he went down without the documents going with him, the people above him would have every incentive to ensure he didn't surface. He wouldn't destroy it, he'd move it. And moving it required a window, logistics, a destination, a transport method that didn't flag surveillance. That window was not immediate. He needed hours to set it up properly, which meant the warrant, if Ferris filed it within 90 minutes, could potentially close before the window opened. Potentially. Madison did not operate on potentially. She looked at Solis, who was still at the workstation, still processing the card data, with the focused intensity of someone who had been given more material than expected and was working through the implications in real time. Solis, she said. Sir Captain, Solis corrected herself. Have you identified the estate's communication infrastructure in your surveillance records? Solis looked up. We have partial mapping. The property has a private fiber connection through a shell company utility account and a satellite uplink registered under a contractor name. Both have been active. If Walker uses the satellite uplink to communicate the new location of the document set to anyone before the warrant executes, is there any mechanism to flag that communication? Solis was quiet for a moment. I can request a FISA authorization to monitor the uplink, but FISA takes time we don't have. I know, Madison thought. Is there an existing authorization that covers the shell company? Another pause longer this time. Solis turned back to her workstation and typed. Madison watched her scroll through something, scroll back. There is an existing counterintelligence authorization on the shell company that covers the utility account, Solis said slowly. It was opened 14 months ago as part of the North Star preliminary work. If the satellite uplink routes through the same shell company account, does it more typing? Then Solis stopped. Yes, she said. Same shell, same authorization. Then we're already covered. Captain, I need to flag this to Colonel Ferris before I activate monitoring under that authorization. Call her, Madison said. Right now, tell her what you found. Tell her we have a legal pathway to monitor Walker's satellite communication before the warrant executes. Solis was already reaching for her phone. The call lasted 4 minutes. At the end of it, Solis looked up. Colonel Ferris is authorizing the monitoring. She's also telling you to lie down. Tell her I appreciate the concern, Madison said. She did not lie down. She moved to the workstation beside Solis and looked at the data as it came in, not the communication content, not yet, but the traffic pattern, volume, frequency, the rhythm of someone who was making a lot of calls in a short period, the kind of rhythm that belongs to a man who is accelerating a timeline he had planned to have more room to execute. Nathan was moving faster than she had estimated. He's compressing his window, she said. I see it, Solis confirmed. How long before Ferris has the warrant? Solis checked the time. She said 90 minutes. It's been 40, which means 50 minutes until the warrant, 40 minutes before we know if it's going to be in time. They both watched the traffic pattern. At the 43rd minute, Solis said, he just initiated an outbound communication on the satellite uplink. Long duration, sustained. Is it the location transfer? I can't decode the content without a separate authorization. But the duration and the frequency signature are consistent with a large data transfer. Solis looked at her. He's transmitting something large. The document set. Madison's jaw tightened. He's not moving it physically. He's sending a copy to someone else. Which means, Solis said quietly, even if we execute the warrant on the estate tonight and recover the physical documents, whoever he just sent a copy to has leverage. How large was the transmission? Solis checked. 12 minutes. At the uplink speed that's consistent with a several hundred-page document package. Madison was already thinking. If Nathan had transmitted a full copy of the document set to an external party, and that external party was one of the names above him in the chain, then the warrant and the detainment order would secure Nathan, but not the broader conspiracy. The people above him would have the same leverage he had, and they would use it the same way to stay protected, to threaten exposure as a deterrent. Unless the transmission would have a destination address, she said, even encrypted. Yes. If we have the satellite uplink under the existing authorization, we have the destination metadata. Solis stopped moving. She turned very slowly and looked at Madison with the expression of someone who has just realized that the person they're talking to has been thinking 3 moves ahead this entire time. We have the destination metadata, she confirmed. Then we know who we sent it to. Yes. Call Ferris right now. The warrant needs an amendment to include the destination party. We have approximately 22 minutes, Solis called. Madison listened to half a conversation that told her everything she needed to know. Ferris's voice on the other end was sharp focused, the voice of someone who was recalculating and adapting without breaking stride. When Solis hung up, she said Ferris is amending the warrant package. She says the judge is still on. She says, Solis paused, something shifting in her expression. She says to tell you this is bigger than we thought. I know, Madison said. She means the name at the destination address. I know, Madison said again. Solis looked at her for a moment. Captain, the name at the destination address, do you recognize it from the ledger you read? Yes, Madison said. He was on page 7, 12 transactions, all of them approved at a level that required a specific kind of security clearance. She paused. He's not a contractor. No, Solis said. He's military. He's not just military, Solis said. She looked at Madison with an expression that was not quite uncertainty and not quite fear, but existed in the space between them. He's currently serving on the Joint Chiefs Advisory Council. The room was quiet. Madison sat with that for exactly as long as she could afford, which was about 4 seconds. Then she said, then the Warren Amendment needs to include a counterintelligence designation. Because the moment that name appears on a standard federal warrant, someone in his office is going to see it before the ink dries. Ferris already flagged it that way, Solis said. She's requesting a counterintelligence seal. Good. Captain Solis stopped, then seemed to decide to say what she was thinking. Are you scared? Madison considered the question, not performing consideration, actually sitting with it for a moment, giving it the honesty it deserved. No, she said. I was scared on the mountain when I thought I wasn't going to make it out. I was scared in the maintenance tunnel when I could hear the countdown and my arm strength was running out. She looked at the workstation, at the traffic data still scrolling. Right now, I'm not scared. I'm angry. And I've learned that angry is a much more useful thing to be when the situation requires precision. Solis was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned back to her screen. At the 67th minute, 23 minutes before Ferris's deadline, a notification came through the secure internal system. Solis read it and sat very still for a moment. The warrant is signed, she said. All components, property search, personal detainment, counterintelligence seal on the secondary designation. Madison exhaled, not dramatically, just a clean release of pressure that comes when a door opens that you weren't certain would open. When do they move on the estate? Ferris is coordinating with the FBI Special Operations Division and a DOJ counterintelligence team. They're staging 40 minutes from the property. She says they move at 0400. Madison checked the time, just over 2 hours. And Walker, she said, is he still on the property? Solis checked the surveillance feed. Yes, he's been stationary for the last 20 minutes. The internal security personnel are active. She's counting 12, possibly 14 individuals on the grounds. He has private security on a residential property, Madison said. That's not just caution. That's a man who knows something is coming and isn't sure from which direction. He thinks you're his biggest problem, Solis said. He should, Madison said, but his biggest problem is actually the judge's signature that's already drying. She stood, walked to the window, not to look out of it, just to move to let the body do something, while the mind finished processing and thought about Nathan in that estate right now. She thought about what he was doing in these hours, whether he was sleeping, whether he was calculating, whether he was feeling any version of what she had felt on the mountain, the specific cold of being cornered, the recognition that the story you told yourself about control was fiction. She hoped he was feeling it. Not because she wanted his suffering. That was too small a thing to want. She wanted him to understand what he had built. She wanted him to sit in the estate he had funded with money that had come at the cost of soldiers' lives, with private security he had purchased with the same currency, and understand fully, without any of the management and compartmentalization that people like him apply to their own choices, that none of it was going to be enough. She wanted him to feel the gap between what he had believed he was and what he actually was. That was not revenge. That was accountability. There was a difference, and Madison Reed had always known the difference, even when the line between them felt dangerously thin. At 03:15, Ferris's vehicle returned to the safe house. She came in fast, standing rather than sitting, and looked at Madison with the focused expression of a commanding officer about to deploy. The team is in position, she said. They move in 45 minutes. I know. I need to ask you something before they do. Ask. Walker's internal security is armed and organized. They're not going to open the gate and wave us in. This is going to be a forced entry operation, and it is going to be complicated. Ferris paused. I need to know if you have any information about the estate's internal layout that might help our team. Any communication Walker may have made in your presence about the property. Anything you observed or were told, Madison thought. Then he mentioned it once, 8 months ago. She stopped. She started again. He talked about a property he was developing as a secondary residence. He mentioned that the communications infrastructure was built into the lower level below grade because he wanted redundancy against signal interference. He said the lower level had independent power. She looked at Ferris. If the primary document set is still on the property physical copies, not just the transmitted version, they'll be in the lower level. That's where he would store anything he needed to access quickly and protect comprehensively. Ferris was already relaying the information through her earpiece. One more thing, Madison said. Yes. I want to be there. Ferris stopped relaying. She looked at Madison. The look was not surprise. It was the look of someone who had anticipated this and had already formed an opinion about it. Your leg is stabilized and functional for limited activity. I am a direct witness to multiple predicate crimes in this case. My presence at the execution of the warrant has evidentiary value and operational value because I have information about Walker's personal behavioral patterns that your team does not have. She met Ferris's gaze and held it. And I have been following this thread since a mountain in Afghanistan on a broken leg in the dark. I am not sitting in a safe house while it closes. Ferris looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, you ride with my vehicle. You stay back from the primary entry team. If your leg gives out at any point, you stop. Agreed, Madison said. And Reed, Ferris's voice shifted something beneath the operational register coming through. What he did to you, what we're about to do, it matters. I need you to know that. Madison was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted to give the honest one rather than the simple one. It matters to the soldiers he sold, she said finally. It matters to the families who lost people in conflicts he helped extend. It matters to every person whose trust he calculated the price of and found affordable. She paused. What he did to me personally, I'll deal with that. But that's not why I'm here. Ferris nodded. No more words needed. At 03:58, 2 minutes before the coordinated entry was scheduled to begin, Madison was in the back of Ferris's vehicle on the access road outside the Loudoun County estate, and she could hear through the open window the particular silence that descends before a professional operation executes not empty silence but loaded silence, the kind that has been organized. She held the walking cast steady against the vehicle seat and thought about Nathan Walker inside those walls. She thought about the word he had said to her in the transport vehicle on the way to the mission that had changed everything. Always. She thought about what it meant when someone said always and meant never. She thought about what it cost to find that out the way she had found it out. And then the entry team moved and the silence ended, and Madison Reed leaned forward in the vehicle and watched the moment she had been building toward since the mountain began to arrive. The entry team breached the gate at 0400 exactly, and Madison heard it from inside Ferris's vehicle. Not the sound of the breach itself, but the radio traffic that followed it, tight and fast and professional, the clipped language of people moving through a space with purpose and training. She sat forward in her seat and listened to each transmission the way she had listened to battlefield radio for 12 years. Not just to the words, but to the pace, the breathing underneath the words, the things that the words weren't saying. The first 90 seconds were clean, then Tango down east perimeter, 2 more active moving toward the main structure. Ferris in the front seat was managing 3 radio channels simultaneously with the practiced ease of someone who had run complex operations before war and understood that the most dangerous thing a coordinator could do was react to each transmission individually instead of tracking the whole picture. Secondary team hold position on the north axis, she said. Let the primary team clear the ground floor before you move to lower level. Copy. Madison was watching the property through the vehicle window. Not the action directly, most of which was happening in areas she couldn't see but the lights. The way lights moved inside a building told you things. A rapid sweep pattern meant a team clearing rooms in sequence. A stationary light in a fixed position meant someone had stopped moving, which meant either the room was clear and being held, or someone inside was not moving voluntarily. 3 minutes in a light in the lower left of the main structure went stationary. Ferris, Madison said. I see it. Lower level, he's already down there. Ferris keyed her radio. Primary team status on lower level access. Still working through ground floor colonel. 2 subjects detained, 3 more active. Lower level doors secured, electronic lock, non-standard. He hardened the lower level independently, Madison said. He planned for exactly this. The communications infrastructure, the independent power, he built the lower level as a last resort position. Which means he has time to destroy the documents, Ferris said. Not a question, a statement, and both of them heard the weight of it at the same time. Ferris made a decision in approximately 2 seconds. All units priority redirect to lower level access. I need that door open in the next 4 minutes. Whatever it takes. Madison was already opening the vehicle door. Reed, Ferris started. I know the behavioral pattern, Madison said. I know how he responds under pressure. If your team gets through that door and goes in tactically, he will not surrender. He will negotiate. He will try to buy time with information. He will offer things. Your team will have to evaluate each offer in real time, and they don't have the context to know what's real and what's a delay tactic. She was already on the ground, the walking cast solid beneath her. I have the context. Ferris looked at her for exactly 1 second. Stay behind the primary line until the door is open. Understood. She moved across the grounds with the walking cast absorbing what the broken leg couldn't, and the physical discomfort was real and present and completely irrelevant. She had made her calculation about the leg back at the safe house when she put the cast on. Pain was information. She had the information. She was moving anyway. The FBI entry team at the lower level door was a 4-person unit working a non-standard electronic lock with a bypass tool that was taking longer than any of them wanted. The team lead, a compact agent named Reyes, who acknowledged Madison's presence with a single look, and then returned to the problem, had the focused efficiency of someone who was not going to panic about the timeline, but was also very clear about what the timeline meant. 90 seconds, Reyes said, not to Madison specifically. To the door, the way people talk to problems they're forcing to yield. Madison positioned herself to the right of the entry point and listened to what was happening on the other side of the door. Nothing which was its own kind of information. Nathan was not moving. Nathan was not making noise. Nathan was waiting, which meant he was doing something that required him to stay in one place and complete it before the door opened. He's not trying to run, she said to Reyes. He's destroying or transmitting. He needs the door to hold for a specific window. How long a window? Depends on what he's doing. If he's using the physical shredder minutes, if he's initiating a second transmission less. Reyes looked at his bypass tool. 60 seconds. Madison put her hand flat against the door and felt through the metal, the faint vibration of machinery on the other side. Rhythmic, mechanical, not a transmission array. Those didn't vibrate that way. Shredder, she said. He's shredding physical documents. Then we need this door open now, Reyes said, and pushed the bypass tool through its final sequence. The lock disengaged. Reyes went through first with his team, which was correct and proper. And Madison waited exactly the 2 seconds of professional courtesy the situation allowed before she followed them in. The lower level was exactly what she had expected from Nathan's description. 8 months ago, built for function, not comfort, with the kind of infrastructure that requires serious money and serious intent to install in a residential property. Communication equipment along the far wall, independent power unit running in the corner. And in the center of the room, Nathan Walker, in a civilian suit, standing next to an industrial document shredder, with his hands raised and his expression completely controlled. He looked at the entry team, then he looked at Madison. And for the first time in everything she had observed about Nathan Walker, over 2 years of working alongside him, she saw something move through his face that he could not fully manage. It was there for only a fraction of a second, a crack in the architecture, something raw and unguarded breaking through the surface before he pulled it back under. She had no name for exactly what it was. Shock partly, but underneath the shock was something else, something that looked almost like relief. The way a man looks when the thing he has been afraid of for a very long time finally arrives and he no longer has to be afraid of it arriving. She held on to that observation and said nothing. Colonel Nathan Walker, Reyes said, you are being detained under federal warrant. Counterintelligence designation case number. I know what it is, Nathan said. His voice was exactly as controlled as his expression had relocked itself to be. Flat. Professional. I want to speak with legal counsel. That right will be honored, Reyes said. Step away from the equipment. Nathan stepped away from the shredder. He did it with the precise compliance of someone who had decided that cooperation with the mechanical process was consistent with his strategy. He was already thinking past this moment. Madison could see it the way his eyes moved the calculation running behind the controlled surface. She stepped forward past Reyes's secondary position until she was standing directly in front of Nathan. Reyes said, Captain. 1 minute, she said. She did not take her eyes off Nathan. Nathan looked at her. The controlled surface held. But his eyes were doing something different than the rest of his face. And Madison had always been better at reading eyes than expressions. Because expressions are managed and eyes are only managed by people who know they're being watched. And Nathan had spent the last 30 seconds believing he was performing for federal agents, not for someone who knew him. His eyes were asking her a question he would never say out loud. She answered it anyway. "I made it out of the maintenance tunnel 2 minutes before the strike hit," she said. "The data card was in my chest pocket. I read 43 pages before the reader died and reconstructed it from memory." She paused. "You missed the card when you audited the array. That was the only thing you missed." Something shifted in his jaw. Micro movement. Controlled immediately. "I'm not going to discuss." "I know," she said. "You're going to wait for counsel, and then you're going to evaluate what you have to offer in exchange for consideration. And then you're going to decide how much of the chain above you is worth protecting and how much of it is worth trading." She watched his face. "I know exactly how you think, Nathan. I spent 2 years learning." "Madison." "Don't," she said, not angry, flat. "Don't use my name like it means what it used to mean." He was quiet. "What I want to know," she said, "is one thing, not for the case, not for Ferris, for me." She held his gaze. "When you called in the airstrike, when you were standing outside that building and you gave the order, were you certain I was already dead? Or did you give the order knowing I might still be alive?" The room was completely silent. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. The controlled surface held. Behind it, the calculation ran. She could see him evaluating the response, not for truth, for strategy. What did the answer cost him legally? What did it cost him with the people in this room? What did it cost him with her? And then something happened that she had not expected. The calculation stopped. Not performed stopping, actual stopping. She saw it the moment when the strategic processing shut down and something else came through, something that existed before strategy, something that had not been entirely managed out of him despite everything. "I knew," he said. The room didn't move. "I knew you might still be alive," Nathan said, "and I gave the order." Reyes's team was very still. Madison held Nathan's gaze and felt the impact of those words move through her in a single organized wave, not breaking her, not undoing the architecture she had built over the last 40-some hours, but registering. Landing where it was supposed to land. She had asked the question because she needed the real answer, not because she expected to feel nothing when she got it. She felt something. She also felt it resolve the way fractures resolve when the pressure is finally applied correctly. Not healed, not gone, but no longer structural. It had moved from the load-bearing part of her to a place where it could be carried without compromising function. She stepped back. "That's on the record," she said to Reyes. "Yes, it is," Reyes said quietly. Two agents moved Nathan toward the stairs. I went without resistance. At the bottom of the staircase, he stopped and turned just once and looked at her. She did not look away. She did not give him anything in that look, not anger, not forgiveness, not grief. She gave him the professional clarity of a soldier who had been given a mission and completed it. He went up the stairs. She turned to the shredder. The industrial unit was still running its internal mechanism, cycling through the last of whatever Nathan had fed into it before the door opened. She looked at what remained, not much fragments, nothing recoverable from the shredder's output. He had been efficient. He had been precise. He had destroyed a significant portion of whatever physical documents had been stored in this room. But not all of it. Because Nathan, being Nathan, had been methodical. And methodical people work in sequence, and the sequence had been interrupted. Along the far wall, in a locked steel cabinet that the FBI technical team was already working on, was the portion of the physical document set he had not yet reached. She could see the corner of a document binder through the cabinet's ventilation slot, the kind of industrial binder used for classified document storage, heavy gauge, with a military specification label visible on the spine. "That cabinet," she said to the technical team lead. "Working on it," he said without looking up. It took 4 minutes. When the cabinet opened, Madison counted 7 binders, 7 physical document binders of classified material in a residential property in Loudoun County, Virginia, stored in a cabinet registered to a shell company that North Star Strategic Solutions had created 3 years ago. The technical team lead looked at the binders, then at Madison, then back at the binders. "Is this what I think it is?" he said. "Every transaction, every approval, every operational detail of a weapons procurement network that has been running for at least 4 years, she said, and the names of every person in the military command structure who authorized or benefited from it." He pulled out an evidence camera and started documenting. Madison stepped back from the cabinet and let the team work. Her leg was informing her with increasing specificity that she had used it past the threshold the doctor had indicated, but she was not yet at the point where it was overriding the rest of her systems, and she had a few more minutes of useful presence before that calculation changed. Ferris arrived in the lower level 6 minutes after Nathan was brought up. She looked at the open cabinet, at the 7 binders, at the technical team, documenting them. She stood in the center of the room and looked at Madison. "The shredder got some of it," Madison said. "How much? Significant volume, but not the binders." Ferris looked at the binders for a long moment. When she looked back at Madison, something had settled in her expression. Not satisfaction, not celebration, but the particular gravity of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and can feel it beginning to shift. "The transmission he made from the satellite uplink," Ferris said. "We have the destination metadata. The warrant amendment has been executed. The secondary subject was taken into federal custody 40 minutes ago at his residence in McLean." Madison was quiet for a moment. The name on page 7 of the Ledger 12 Transactions Advisory Council, high enough that hearing it on a counterintelligence seal had made Solis's breath catch. "Did he cooperate?" she asked. "He asked for immunity immediately," Ferris said, "which tells us 2 things. 1, he has information above his own level, and 2, he has been expecting something like this for long enough to have a response prepared." "Above his level," Madison said. How far above? Ferris held her gaze. "That's what we're going to spend the next several months finding out." The weight of that settled in the room. Madison looked at the binders. 7 binders, 4 years of transactions, and the financial architecture of a network that had moved weapons through conflict zones, prolonged engagements that should have ended and funded itself with the compound interest of other people's suffering. She thought about the soldiers who had deployed into those prolonged engagements. She thought about the families who had received flags. She thought about the specific human cost of decisions that had been made in rooms like this one, not in the field, not under fire, but in comfortable, deliberate safety by people who had calculated the acceptable loss and decided it was acceptable because it was not their loss. Her hands were steady. She was not going to feel triumphant about this. Triumph was for the end, and this was not the end. This was the moment when the end became possible. There was a difference, and she was not someone who confused the possibility of a thing with the thing itself. The investigation would take months. The legal proceedings would take years. Nathan would negotiate. The secondary subject would negotiate. Other names would surface, and each one would require its own process. But the 7 binders were real. The data card was real. Her testimony was real, and she was alive. "Ferris," she said. "Yes. My unit. The soldiers who were on the operation with me, Ortega Holt the others. Their records will show a mission where their commander was reported KIA. That report is in the official record." "We'll have it corrected," Ferris said immediately. "Not just corrected. I want every member of that unit notified directly through a channel they can verify that the KIA report was false and that it was deliberate. They operated under orders that night that they didn't have the full picture for. They deserve to know what actually happened." "Agreed." "And Ortega specifically, she broke ranks for about 6 seconds on that radio to tell me what Walker had done. 6 seconds that gave me the information I needed. She took a real risk in that moment. I want that on her record as a commendation, not a conduct flag." Ferris was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll personally file it." Madison nodded. The technical team was moving the binders into evidence containers. Reyes was coordinating the processing of Nathan's private security personnel, most of whom had complied with the entry team without significant resistance, professional, hired security that understood the difference between a private employer and a federal warrant. One of them had required a physical intervention on the east perimeter, but the team had managed it without escalation. Nathan himself was in the back of a federal vehicle somewhere on the property's main drive waiting for transport. Madison did not go to look at him. She had said what she needed to say in this room, and she had gotten the answer she needed, and what happened to Nathan Walker from this point forward was the business of federal prosecutors and courts and the institutional processes that existed precisely for moments when people in positions of power decided that the power was the point rather than the responsibility. She walked up the stairs on her own. Slowly, the leg was very specifically communicating that it had reached its limit. She acknowledged the communication and completed the climb, and came out into the main level of the estate and kept moving toward the front entry and the cool morning air outside. It was past 0500 now. The sky to the east was doing what skies do in Virginia in the early morning, the dark thinning out in increments, the horizon beginning to separate from the rest of the darkness, not yet light, but no longer fully night. She stood outside and breathed. From behind her, she heard footsteps. Not the tactical movement of the entry team, something different. She turned. Specialist Danny Ortega was standing on the estate's front drive. Madison stared at her. Ortega looked back. She was in civilian clothes, which meant she had not come with the official entry team. She looked like she had been awake for a long time and had driven a significant distance and had not thought through what she was going to say when she got here. "How?" Madison said. "Colonel Ferris," Ortega said. "She called my personal cell 4 hours ago. She said you were alive and that the operation tonight was moving and that—" Ortega stopped. She pressed her mouth closed for a moment. "She said she thought I should know and that I could come if I wanted." Madison looked at her. Ortega was 24 years old and had been a soldier for 3 years. And on that mountain, she had made a choice in 6 seconds that most people 3 times her age and experience would not have made. And she was standing here in civilian clothes in the early morning because she had driven from wherever she'd been, and that was enough. "You did the right thing," Madison said, "on the radio. You know that." Ortega's jaw worked. "I didn't do enough. I got out. I left you in there. I ordered you out. I know. And you followed a direct order from a superior officer in a live combat situation, which is exactly what you were trained and required to do." Madison held her gaze. "Danny, I'm standing here. The building is dealt with. The man who gave that order is in a federal vehicle 50 meters from where we're standing. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, and then you drove here in the middle of the night because you needed to see for yourself that I was alive." She paused. "That's not guilt. That's loyalty. I know the difference." Ortega's composure fractured. Not dramatically, not with any performance. Just a very young soldier in the early morning, letting the previous 48 hours land on her all at once. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Madison let her. When Ortega looked up, she said, "Is it over?" "This part," Madison said. "What comes next?" Madison considered the question honestly, the way Ortega deserved. "Long processes," she said. "Federal investigation, legal proceedings, probably months before the full scope is public, probably years before the courts finish with it." She looked at the lightening horizon. "But the documents are in federal custody. The people responsible are in custody. The transmission Walker made last night was intercepted, and the destination is also in custody. The network is exposed." She paused. "The part that can be stopped has been stopped." Ortega was quiet for a moment. Then, "Corporal Holt wants you to know he's okay. His injury was minor. We've all been, no one knew what to do. Walker reported you as KIA, and then we were just supposed to continue, I guess. Like nothing happened." "What did the unit do?" Ortega looked at her steadily. "We didn't accept it. None of us did. Holt put a formal inquiry into the report within 24 hours. 3 other members of the team filed supporting statements." She paused. "We didn't know if it would do anything. We didn't know if you were actually, but we weren't willing to just accept his account." Madison was quiet. She thought about 12 soldiers. She thought about the specific weight of what it meant that they had filed those inquiries, knowing that the inquiry went into a command structure that had just generated the report they were questioning, knowing it might go nowhere doing it anyway. "Tell Holt," she said, "that I know, and that it matters." Ortega nodded. Behind them, Ferris had come out of the estate and was walking toward the vehicle line. She stopped when she saw Ortega, and something moved through her expression that looked like quiet satisfaction, the kind a person feels when a thing they arranged turns out to have been the right call. She looked at Madison. "Transport to the medical facility is ready," she said. "The leg needs a surgical team today. Not tomorrow, today." "I know," Madison said. "The legal team will need your full testimony starting in 48 hours. You'll have that time to recover." 48 hours is enough." Ferris nodded. She looked at Ortega. "Specialist, there will be a formal debrief scheduled for the full unit within the week. Until then, you can tell your team that the investigation is active and in the right hands." She paused. You can also tell them that the report filed by Corporal Holt and the supporting statements from the other unit members have been entered into the case record and flagged for a commendation review. Ortega absorbed this. Yes, Colonel, thank you. Ferris nodded once and moved toward her vehicle. Madison looked at Ortega one more time. Go home, she said. Sleep. You drove here in the middle of the night. You saw what you came to see. Yes, Captain, Ortega said. Donnie. She waited until Ortega met her eyes. I mean it. You did well. All of you did. Ortega straightened, not dramatically, not performing. Just a young soldier standing up a little taller, because she had been told by someone she trusted that the thing she had been afraid was not enough actually was. She turned and walked to her car. Madison watched her go. Then she turned toward the east where the sky was fully committed to becoming morning. Now the dark gone from the horizon entirely, the light arriving with the particular indifference of natural things that proceed without regard for what human beings have done in the dark. She thought about the next 48 hours. Surgery, recovery, testimony, the beginning of a legal process that would be long and complicated and conducted by people whose job it was to do exactly what she could not do, pursue it through the institutional mechanisms that existed, because someone somewhere in the history of this country had understood that individual soldiers could not be the only check on the people commanding them. She had been the check that the institutions failed to provide in that building on the mountain. She had been the check because there was no other check available in that moment. But she was not supposed to be the only one, and she was not going to carry the weight of it as if she were. The system had failed to protect her. But the system also had Ferris in it, soulless, the judge who had signed the warrant at 5 in the morning, Priya Osman at the border station, Elena at the clinic, Hamid on the mountain road, Ortega on the radio for 6 seconds that she didn't have to spare. Systems were not monolithic. They were not uniformly corrupt or uniformly clean. They were made of people, and people were capable of both the failure that Nathan Walker represented and the integrity that Ortega had demonstrated in the dark. Madison Reed understood, standing in the morning outside of Virginia Estate, where the thing she had been building toward since a mountain in Afghanistan was now secured, that her work was not to be the soldier who fixed everything. Her work was to be the soldier who, when the system failed, did not fail with it, and then came back to the system and gave it what it needed to do the rest. She had done that. Her leg reminded her with considerable urgency that she had done it on a broken support structure for considerably longer than was medically advisable. She turned and walked toward Ferris's vehicle. Behind her, the estate was active with the organized movement of federal agents doing their jobs. The evidence was secured. The subjects were in custody. The documents that Nathan Walker had tried to destroy were in evidence containers on their way to a federal facility. And somewhere in that evidence on 43 pages that a woman had memorized on the side of a mountain and in 7 binders that had survived because the door opened, 60 seconds before they were scheduled to be destroyed, was the full accounting of what had been done. Names, dates, amounts, decisions, and consequences, waiting for the people whose job it was to read it. Madison got in the vehicle. She leaned her head back against the seat. She closed her eyes. Not because she was done, because this piece was done, and she was a soldier who understood the tactical value of rest between engagements, and what was coming next was going to require everything she had. The vehicle moved. The estate fell away behind them. And Captain Madison Reed, who had been reported dead on a mountain in Afghanistan and had refused that report with every broken leg, cold-blooded, precisely calculated step she had taken since let herself exist quietly in the moving vehicle in the Virginia morning and feel for the first time in 40-some hours the specifics and uncomplicated fact of being alive. The surgery took 4 hours and 20 minutes, and Madison was awake for the first 45 seconds of the recovery process before her body made the decision for her and pulled her under into the kind of sleep that has no dreams, because the mind is too exhausted to generate them. She woke 11 hours later in a military medical facility outside Bethesda with a reconstructed left leg, 2 surgical drains, and a federal attorney sitting in the chair beside her bed, reviewing documents with the focused attention of someone who had been there for a while and was not planning to leave soon. The attorney's name was Carol Brent, and she introduced herself with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that the person she was talking to had just come out of surgery and did not need preamble. You're the primary witness in a federal counterintelligence case that currently involves 11 named subjects, Brent said. Your testimony is the evidentiary spine of the detainment orders for 6 of them. I need to prepare you for what the next several months are going to look like. Madison looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at Brent. How's Nathan, in federal custody at an undisclosed facility? His legal team filed for bail and was denied on national security grounds. Brent paused. He's been cooperative in limited ways. He confirmed the basic operational facts of the Afghanistan mission in exchange for a preliminary assurance regarding the scope of charges. He has not yet provided information about the subjects above his level in the chain. Madison said, what makes you confident? Because Nathan is not loyal, he's strategic. The people above him in the chain have more to offer in terms of legal protection and more to threaten in terms of consequences. As long as he believes they can help him, he'll protect them. The moment he calculates that they can't, or that cooperating against them costs him less than protecting them, he'll give them up completely. She shifted carefully against the pillow. What's the current status of the subject taken from McLean? General Thomas Harwick, Brent said, and the name landed in the room with the weight of something that had been classified for a long time being spoken in open air for the first time. He requested immunity within the first hour. The DOJ is evaluating the scope of what he's offering against the scope of what the evidence already establishes. General Thomas Harwick, the name from page 7 of the ledger. 12 transactions, advisory council, a man whose career had encompassed 3 decades of military service, 2 wars, and a level of institutional trust that made the data card's implications when they were eventually confirmed documented and presented in court. Not just a legal matter, but something that would require the military's institutional narrative about itself to absorb a fracture it had not previously been asked to accommodate. Madison had thought about this moment, not with anticipation, with the specific kind of readiness that comes from knowing a hard thing is coming and deciding not to flinch from it. Harwick's cooperation, she said, does it go above him? Brent looked at her steadily. Yes. How far? That's currently outside the scope of what I can share at your clearance level for this conversation. Madison absorbed this. The implication was clear enough without the specifics. What Harwick was offering in exchange for immunity was information about people above him, which meant the chain did not stop at a 3-star general with an advisory council position. It went further. It was bigger than North Star Strategic Solutions. It was bigger than a weapons procurement network. It was the kind of thing that when it eventually surfaced in court filings and congressional briefings, in the careful institutional language of federal prosecutors, would require people to reckon with how long something like this could operate inside the structures that were supposed to prevent it. I need to know one thing, Madison said. The soldiers, the ones who deployed into conflicts that North Star helped prolong. The families. Is there a mechanism in this prosecution to acknowledge what was done to them? Brent was quiet for a moment. There is a victim's impact process in federal cases of this nature, she said carefully. It is not straightforward when the harm is diffuse, when it encompasses military personnel across multiple deployments rather than a discrete set of identified individuals. But there are legal advocates who specialize in exactly this kind of case, and the DOJ has already been in contact with 2 of them. That's not an answer. No, Brent agreed. It's not a complete one. The honest answer is that the legal system is better at prosecuting the people who cause the harm than it is at repairing the harm itself. I can't promise you an outcome that the law doesn't currently have a clean mechanism to deliver. A pause. What I can tell you is that what you recovered from that building, the card, the reconstructed notes, the 7 binders, is going to be the evidentiary foundation of a prosecution that will be, when it is complete, one of the most significant counterintelligence cases this country has seen in 20 years. The people who made those decisions will be accountable in a court of law. And that accountability, while it is not the same as repair, is not nothing. Madison looked at the ceiling again. It was not nothing. She had known since the mountain that she was not going to be able to fix everything that had been broken. She was one soldier with a broken leg and a data card. She was not an institution. She was not a system. She was a woman who had survived something that was designed to kill her, and had decided that surviving was not enough if she walked away from what she knew. She had not walked away. That would have to be enough for now. Okay, she said, tell me what my testimony needs to cover. Brent opened the first document. They worked for 3 hours. The next 6 weeks were defined by a rhythm that Madison had not previously experienced, not the rhythm of active deployment, which she knew completely, and not the rhythm of ordinary life, which she had largely forgotten, but something in between. Physical therapy in the mornings, which was its own kind of operation. Methodical, painful progress, measured in degrees of flexion and weight-bearing increments that felt absurdly small against the scale of what her body had already accomplished on a mountain in eastern Afghanistan. Legal preparation in the afternoons, which required a different kind of precision, not physical but cognitive, the discipline of recounting events with accuracy and completeness, under the knowledge that every detail would be scrutinized by people whose professional skill was finding the inconsistency that collapsed an account. She was good at it. She had always been good at the kind of focus that converts complexity into sequence. This happened, then this, then this. Here's what I observed. Here's what I concluded. Here is the distinction between those two things. The federal attorneys working the case began scheduling her sessions for 3 hours instead of 2 within the first week, not because she was slow, but because she was thorough in ways that produced more usable material than they had anticipated. Colonel Ferris visited on the third week. She came in the morning between physical therapy and the first legal session, and she sat in the chair that had become the de facto guest seat in Madison's recovery room and set a coffee on the table, not the facility. Coffee, something from outside, the kind of small, deliberate gesture that communicates that you have been thinking about the person you're bringing it to. The binders, Ferris said, full forensic analysis complete, 412 pages of financial and operational records. We have transaction documentation going back 6 years, 2 years further than our original estimate of the network's operational timeline. 6 years, Madison said. The network was established before Nathan Walker's involvement. He was recruited into it, not the architect of it. Ferris paused. That doesn't change what he did, but it contextualizes the scope. This was a mature, established operation when he entered it. He accelerated certain elements and provided command-level access that the network had been trying to obtain for some time. But the infrastructure predates him by 2 years, which means Harwick predates him. Harwick is one of 3 founding figures the forensic accounting has identified. The other 2 are civilian. One is a North Star executive who has been in federal custody for 10 days. The third, Ferris stopped. Then she said carefully, the third individual died 14 months ago. Natural causes, apparently. We are currently reviewing whether those circumstances were in fact natural. Madison was quiet for a moment. Someone cleaned house before this could reach them. That's one interpretation. We're treating it as a line of inquiry. Ferris, Madison looked at her directly. How far does this go? Ferris held her gaze. I've been in federal law enforcement for 19 years, she said. I have worked organized crime cases, terrorism financing cases, and 2 previous counterintelligence investigations. What this case is showing us, she stopped, started again. The scope is larger than what I have personally encountered. That's not a precise metric, but it's an honest one. Madison absorbed this with the stillness she had developed over 6 weeks of processing large, difficult information in small, enclosed spaces. She breathed it in. She held it. She did not let it destabilize her because destabilization was not useful. And she had learned, perhaps before she should have had to, that you can carry a very large thing if you carry it correctly. What do you need from me that I haven't already given? She said. I need you to be prepared for the possibility that the legal proceedings will surface information about the full scope of this network in a public context before we have prosecuted all of the people involved. When that happens, and it will happen, these things always leak before they're ready. There will be pressure on you specifically. Media, political, possibly personal. You are the most visible figure in the evidentiary chain. You are a woman, you are a decorated officer, and you survived something that was designed to kill you. That is a story that people are going to tell in ways that you do not control. Madison was quiet. I can handle attention, she said. It's not attention I'm concerned about, Ferris said. It's the version of you that the attention creates, the survivor narrative, the hero narrative. These are real and they are deserved and they are also incomplete. And incomplete narratives have a way of becoming constraints. She looked at Madison steadily. I've watched good people get consumed by the story that other people decided to tell about them. I don't want that to happen to you. It was the most personal thing Ferris had said to her in 6 weeks of working together. Madison recognized it as such, not as performance or management, but as the specific concern of someone who had been watching her carefully enough to know where the real risk was. "The story I want told," Madison said, "is the one about the soldiers, not about me." "I know," Ferris said. "I'll do what I can to keep the focus there." "And Nathan," Madison said, "when his proceedings go public." "What do I do with that?" Ferris thought about it honestly, which Madison appreciated. "Nothing," she said finally. "You've already done your part. The courts do theirs. You let the process run, and you don't attach yourself to his outcome." Madison nodded slowly. It was the right answer. She had known it was the right answer. Sometimes you need to hear the right answer from someone else before you can fully commit to it. 4 weeks later, the case broke publicly. Not in the way Madison had expected, not a controlled release through the DOJ's communications process, but through a congressional staffer who leaked a summary document to a journalist who published it before the editorial review was complete. The story that went out was accurate in its broad strokes and incomplete in its specifics, which was the worst possible combination. Enough truth to be credible, enough gap to be filled with inference. Madison's name was in the second paragraph. By morning, it was in every major publication in the country. Her phone returned to her 3 weeks into recovery, along with her rebuilt military credentials and an official correction to the KIA report in her service record went from manageable to unmanageable in the space of about 2 hours. She silenced it, set it face down on the table beside her physical therapy equipment, and spent the morning doing exactly what she had been scheduled to do, working the leg through its current range of motion protocols with a therapist named Gerald, who had been working with her for 5 weeks and understood by now that she responded better to precision than to encouragement. "You're compensating on the left side again," Gerald said. "I know." "Stop. I'm aware of it. I'm correcting it." "You correct it, and then you compensate again when you think I'm not watching." "I'm not compensating, I'm managing asymmetry." "Those are the same thing." "They're not." Gerald looked at her with the expression of a physical therapist who has had this exact argument with this exact patient 6 times and has made peace with not winning it. 60% weight bearing on the left by end of week. 70, Madison said. 65, he said. Done. This was the rhythm that mattered. Not the media, not the publications, not the story being told in the second paragraph. The 65% weight bearing on a leg that had been broken and operated on and rebuilt. The physical evidence that what was destroyed could be reconstructed, not identically, not without the record of the damage, but functional, capable, carrying weight. Ferris called in the afternoon. "Have you seen the coverage?" she said. "I saw enough this morning. I stopped looking." "That's probably wise. I want you to know that the DOJ is issuing a formal statement in the next hour that will clarify several of the details that were inaccurate in the initial publication. Will it work? It will create a more accurate record. Whether the accurate record is the one that sticks is a different question." A pause. "How are you?" Fine, Madison said. Then, because Ferris had earned better than reflexive answers, "It's strange. I spent 40-some hours doing the hardest thing I've done in my career, and now the hardest part is sitting in a medical facility while other people tell the story of it. A beat. I'd rather be doing something." "You will be," Ferris said. "Soon." "How soon?" "The formal congressional briefing is in 3 weeks. You'll testify in a closed session before the Intelligence Committee. After that, depending on the legal timeline, there may be additional proceedings." A pause. "And there has been a request, not a requirement, a request from the Army's Special Operations Command regarding your future assignment." Madison was still. "What kind of request?" "There's a role being developed in the Special Operations Training pipeline. Senior advisor position focused on command ethics and tactical decision-making under pressure. The kind of role that requires someone who has both the operational background and the specific experiential authority to teach what the curriculum covers." Madison understood immediately what was being described. It was not a desk job. It was not a consolation. It was a position whose value was precisely the thing that Nathan Walker had tried to take from her, the authority that comes from having been tested at the exact point where everything could have failed and choosing in that moment correctly. "It's not a requirement," Ferris said again. "I know," Madison said. "I heard you the first time. Do you want time to consider it?" "No," Madison said. "Yes, tell them yes." 3 weeks later, Madison Reed walked into a secure briefing room in the Hart Senate office building on 2 legs, the left one doing its 68% weight bearing, which was 3% above Gerald's revised target and within the range that a person who is paying close attention could detect only if they knew what to look for. 7 members of the Senate Intelligence Committee were seated around the table. Their staff lined the walls. Brent and Ferris were positioned behind Madison to her left. The room was the kind of room that has absorbed a significant volume of consequential testimony over the decades and carries that history in its particular density of quiet. Madison sat down, identified herself for the record, and began. She spoke for 2 hours and 40 minutes without notes. Not because she was performing the absence of notes, she had the reconstructed document from her boot and the full legal transcript of her earlier testimony available to her, but because she did not need them. She had been living inside this material for 8 weeks. She knew it the way she knew terrain. She had operated in not just the facts, but the shape of it, the way the pieces connected the places where the evidence was strong and the places where it required context to be fully understood. The committee members asked questions. Some of the questions were good, specific, precise, aimed at the evidentiary gaps that the legal teams were still working to close. Some of the questions were less good, broader, more political, aimed at the narrative rather than the evidence. Madison answered the good questions with the detail they deserved, and the less good ones with the precision that redirected them back to facts. At the 2-hour mark, Senator Margaret Hale, a member of the committee who had served on it for 11 years and had the reputation of someone who had heard everything and was not easily moved by anything, looked at Madison across the table and said, "Captain Reed, in your assessment, based on everything you have seen and documented and experienced in this matter, how is it possible that an operation of this scale and duration operated inside the structures designed to prevent exactly this kind of corruption?" The room was quiet. Madison looked at the senator for a moment. "Because the structures designed to prevent it require people to use them," she said. "A reporting mechanism only works if someone reports. An oversight process only works if someone oversees." The corruption in this case was supposed to operate for 6 years, not because the structural safeguards were absent, but because the people who should have triggered them either didn't know what they were seeing or calculated that the cost of reporting was higher than the cost of not reporting. She paused. "What I did from the mountain to this room is not extraordinary. It is exactly what the system asks soldiers to do when they encounter a failure at the command level. The extraordinary part is that it needed to happen at all." Senator Hale looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you, Captain," she said quietly. Briefing closed. Outside the room in the corridor, Ferris stood beside Madison for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "That last answer. What about it? It's going to be quoted." "Probably," Madison said. "How do you feel about that?" Madison thought about it honestly. If it makes one person report something they would have otherwise calculated away from reporting, then I feel fine about it. Ferris nodded once. 2 months after that, on a morning in late spring when the light had the particular quality of early warmth that makes everything look slightly more resolved than it actually is, Madison Reed stood in front of a class of 22 special operations soldiers at a training facility in North Carolina. They were seated in a loose formation, not rigid, not casual, the kind of arrangement that belongs to people who are trained enough to be comfortable, but professional enough not to mistake comfort for permission. They ranged from 22 to 34 years old. Several of them had deployment records that overlapped with hers in theater, if not in direct operation. One of them, a sergeant in the 3rd row, had been on a rotation into the Eastern Afghanistan theater during the period that covered Operation Iron Horizon, and he was watching her with an expression that told her he knew exactly who she was and had decided to reserve his assessment. That was fine. That was exactly right. She did not want deference. She wanted engagement. She stood in front of them without a podium, without notes, with the particular authority of a person who has earned the right to take up space through the specific experiences that this room was built to discuss. "My name is Captain Madison Reed," she said. "In October of last year, my commanding officer reported me as killed in action while I was still alive and called an airstrike on my position. I survived. He is currently awaiting federal trial on 11 counts, including conspiracy, procurement fraud, and conduct unbecoming an officer." She paused. "I'm not here to tell you that story so you know who I am. I'm here because that story is a case study in the specific ways that command authority can fail. And your job starting now is to understand those failure points well enough to recognize them before they produce the moment that I had to survive on a mountain with a broken leg." The room was very still. She looked at them, all of them, one at a time briefly, not a performance of authority, just contact. The specific acknowledgement that she was talking to people, not at them. We are going to spend the next 12 weeks covering command ethics, decision-making, under pressure, accountability, mechanisms, and the specific psychology of how good soldiers end up following bad orders. We are going to cover how corruption establishes itself all inside command structures and what the early indicators look like before they become catastrophic. And we are going to cover what you do specifically, practically, with your name on it when you see something wrong in your chain of command, and the cost of reporting feels like more than you can afford. She paused. Because the cost of not reporting is always higher. I can prove that mathematically. I can also prove it from experience. The sergeant in the third row, the one who had been watching her with the reserved assessment, raised his hand. "Captain," he said, "the commanding officer you described. How long did it take before you saw what he actually was?" Madison held his gaze. "That's the most important question in this course," she said. "And the honest answer is I saw pieces of it before I was willing to name it. I saw things that didn't fit and I attributed them to factors that let me keep trusting him." She paused. "What I'm going to teach you is how to stop doing that. Not cynicism. I don't want you suspicious of every commander you serve under, but honest, clear-eyed observation. The kind that trusts the evidence instead of the relationship." The sergeant nodded slowly. Satisfied not because the answer was comfortable, but because it was real. She taught for 4 hours that morning. By the time the session closed, 2 soldiers had asked questions she hadn't anticipated, which was exactly the kind of engagement she had hoped for. 3 had stayed afterward to continue the conversation, and she had held those conversations with the full attention each one deserved, because these were the conversations that mattered. Not the testimony before committees, not the documentation filed in federal proceedings, but the actual transmission of understanding from one soldier to another in a room where no one was performing for anyone. That evening in her quarters on the base, she received a message from Ferris. Nathan Walker's plea agreement finalized today. It read, 18 counts, cooperation agreement on Harwick, and 2 additional subjects. Sentencing in 4 months. General Harwick's trial date set. I thought you should know before it goes public tomorrow. Madison read it twice. She set the phone down. She thought about what she felt, and what she found was this: not satisfaction, not relief, not the particular resolution that stories are supposed to provide at their endings. What she found was something quieter and more durable than any of those things. The feeling of work done. Not perfectly, not completely, not with the kind of clean resolution that makes a thing feel finished in the way that lets you put it down, but done. Nathan Walker had made a choice in a burning building and believed that choice was the end of her. She had made a different choice in the maintenance tunnel in the dark on a broken leg with an airstrike incoming and her radio dead, and that choice had brought her from the mountain in Afghanistan to a training room in North Carolina where 22 soldiers were going to learn to be harder to betray. That was the outcome. Not a monument, not a verdict, a room full of soldiers who would carry something forward that had been nearly buried in the debris of a building in eastern Afghanistan. She went to sleep. She woke before dawn, as she always did, and went to the training facility as she had been doing, and stood outside in the early morning before the day organized itself into its scheduled components, and felt the leg hold her weight. The way reconstructed, things hold weight with effort that is no longer visible, with the incorporated memory of having been broken and having been rebuilt, with a solidity that is not the same as what came before, but is in its own specific way stronger. There are soldiers who go through the worst thing that can happen to them and come out changed in ways that subtract from what they were. There are soldiers who come out the same, which is its own kind of impossible. And there are soldiers who come out carrying the worst thing as material, not baggage, not wound, but evidence of what they know now that they did not know before. Captain Madison Reed stood in the early morning on a base in North Carolina and knew exactly which kind of soldier she was. The commander who abandoned her had believed he was erasing her. He had only made her impossible to ignore. And the soldiers who came through that training room, who learned from her what command failure looked like before it became catastrophic, who understood because of her testimony what accountability required, who would one day stand in their own compromised moments and make the choice she had made on the mountain, Those soldiers were the answer to everything Nathan Walker had tried to do. He had tried to end her story. She had turned it into a lesson that would outlast him completely. Captain Madison Reed was not a survivor. She was the standard.